To the ICANN82 Readout webinar. There are still people joining the room. Please hold the line. The webinar will begin shortly. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the ICANN82 Readout, highlights and takeaways from the Community Forum in Seattle. My name is Lars Steffen. I'm Head of Digital Infrastructures and Resilience at ECO, the Association of the Internet Industry. And this webinar is a collaboration between ICANN.org and the ECO Association. So thank you for everyone who's involved and for the participation and organization of today's webinar. I've taken a look, it's the 13th readout session. So this is already taking a while since we started this format, and for the virtual ICANN meeting 69. And I would like to welcome our hosts for today, which are, as always, Christopher Mondini, Vice President, Stakeholder Engagement and Managing Director, Europe from ICANN, and Thomas Rickert, Director Names and Numbers at ECO. And as always as well, we have a great lineup of speakers who will provide updates from the respective constituencies in an alphabetical order. So we have Nicolas Caballero with us. He's the chair of the GAC. Hervé Clément, the chair of the ASO. Greg DiBiase, chair of the GNSO Council. Chris Disspain, member of the ccNSO Council. Philippe Foucault, chair of the ISPCP. Joanna Kulesza, she's the ALAC liaison to the GAC. And last but not least, Mohan, he's the chair of the SSAC. And before we dive into substance, I would like to briefly take you through our housekeeping rules. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available after the meeting. Of course, for this webinar, the ICANN expected standards for behavior apply. And you will be muted throughout the webinar, but of course, we would like to have this format as interactive as possible. So if you would like to ask questions, please feel free to do so. You can do this via the questions part on the right-hand side of your screen of the GoToWebinar dashboard, or you can also raise your hand virtually, and then we will unmute you, and then you can also raise your question. If you do this, please state your name and your affiliation before you ask your question. And after the webinar, you will see a brief survey. And this is always very helpful for us. If you could provide feedback, what has been useful, where we can improve, so that we can develop this format further. Just one note from ECO. So what are the next events and webinars that you can participate in? So tomorrow we have a webinar on the Digital Services Act and services that ECO is starting to offer around this. So this is quite interesting, especially for those who don't have a presence in the European Union. Next week, we have a webinar to navigate Web3 domains. At the end of April, you can meet ECO, Thomas, and me at the Nordic Domain Days in Stockholm. And last but not least, the next ICANN readout will take place on the 18th of June for the ICANN83 meeting that will take place in Prague. And you can find all those dates on our website on international.eco.de/events. And there you can also subscribe to our newsletter and register for the events. But I would like to stop here and hand over to Chris. And Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lars and Thomas and all of the organizers from ECO. Very grateful to be here to welcome you on behalf of ICANN I find these very illuminating, useful analyses and reviews of meetings and a great way to build cohesion in the Europe-based community. Just a couple of quick comments about the statistics. I often let you know some of the numbers. So over the 8th to 13th of March dates where we met in Seattle, our first meeting in Seattle, we actually have updated numbers. We had 1,369 in-person participants and 548 joining virtually, remotely, and fully 20% of them were from Europe, both virtual and in person, the second largest group after North America, as you can imagine. We had, that brings us about 2,000, which over the last 10 years tends to be what the attendance at an ICANN public meeting has been, a combined 2,000 or so. But we'll be continuing to look at these statistics and see what we can learn from them from an engagement standpoint. We were pleased to award the Community Excellence Honors Award to Steven Dierhake, a longtime community member who I know is well known to a number of you on the call. And there were very interesting community discussions in such sessions as the How We Meet discussion about the sort of any potential adjustments to ICANN meetings. There was a geopolitical update talking about all of the negotiations and diplomatic processes underway. And I got a lot of kudos on behalf of the ICANN staff from the Kim Davies introductory presentation on the time zone database management. And it really, one commenter said this really tells the story of the criticality of one of ICANN's core technical functions. And we really took that on as an engagement team to think about how we can make that accessible and linkable to stakeholders everywhere about what ICANN does for them. I'm going to turn it over because I'm very eager to hear what people have to say about the various issues and topics. And I think it's Thomas who comes next. Thanks.
That's correct. Thanks so much, Chris. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I would like to go on the record congratulating Steven Dierhake as well. You know, well-deserved award. So that's great news. And I'd also like to briefly let you know what we have planned for today. You might remember that during previous readouts, we went through the various groups, and then each of the presenters introduced one or two topics, and then we've asked the others to chime in on those topics. This time around, we're going to do it slightly differently because we've listed a number of issues that we wanted to talk about, things that the panelists for today's meeting have identified as important to their respective groups. So we're going to run through these topics. We have 1, 2, 3 speakers that wanted to say a few words about these topics. And of course, if you as the participants would like to comment or get in on those topics, write a comment in the chat or ask a question. And as Lars said, we can also unmute your microphone so that you can join the discussion. All right, so the first topic is going to be around the discussions with the board. You know, usually at ICANN meetings, the ICANN board meets with various stakeholder groups or constituencies or what's there, Cs, SGs, to discuss topics that are important to them. And we will go first with Chris, who's going to talk about board seat changes. Chris, over to you. Chris Disspain, that is.
Thank you, Thomas. Hello, everybody. This is Chris Disspain. Yes, I'll be very brief because there's not a huge amount to say, although, of course, it's a very important topic. So 2 things. First, Becky Buerger is turned out at the end of the year at the AGM in Oman, and she occupies a board seat that is in the elective power of the Contracted Parties House. And after an exhaustive process, especially for the candidates, the Contracted Parties House has appointed Greg DiBiase, who is on the call and can doubtless answer any questions you might like to ask him at some point, to take that seat, and Greg will take that seat, as I said, at the end of the AGM in Oman. Meanwhile, there's been an interim board replacement because Katrina Sataki stood down from the board last year, and she had another 2 years to run, but she stood down, and so the ccNSO has gone through its process of replacing her. She had a ccNSO board seat, and the ccNSO elected Byron Holland, who I know a number of you will know, to replace her, and he has already taken his seat on the board. He was sucked into the board vortex during the meeting in wherever we were a couple of weeks ago, and it's a fire hose of information for new board members. But I've no doubt that Byron will be more than capable. As most of you all know, he's former chair of the ccNSO councillor, and CEO of CIRA, which runs both the .ca, ccTLD, but also a number of GTLDs. That's it. That's what's happened so far. I hope that's enough for you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, Chris. And by the way, the third group that I was struggling to get the acronym for is AC. So we have constituencies, stakeholder groups, and advisory committees. Those are the three types of groups that the board usually regularly meets with. Now, I do know that Philip would like to talk about his discussions with the board as well.
Thanks, Thomas. Philippe Foucault. Yeah, thanks for having me. I wanted to allude to a slightly different topic. The discussions we had with the board during that meeting, as those who attended the meeting would know, we generally have one single question for each and every constituency. And as a side note, maybe moving forward, that would be interesting to have all of us together to hear what others have to say on that question. And that question was the following. I had to go back to my email to get it right. How can we work more closely together to ensure governments are encouraged not to legislate around the multi-stakeholder model? And the commercial stakeholder group, their answer was probably slightly different from those of other constituencies, because it was along the lines of, well, maybe we should think about doing our job first, rather than, complaining that others may try and do things that we would consider within our remit. That's just to put it very shortly, the essence of the CSG's answer to the issue. I'm sure you can think about multiple topics as examples. But we had a robust and interesting discussion on the topic with the board on this. I think we all agree that on a number of those, we need to work more quickly, I guess, and deliver on some of those topics. And that's probably the reason why, for good or bad, legislators legislate as they do, and even if the end result may not be pleasing to a number of us. Back to you, Thomas.
All right. Thanks, Philippe. The next topic on the list is the pilot holistic review. That's a fun topic. And again, we have Chris and then Philip who volunteered to speak to that. But I promise that after that, we're going to have topics where other panelists are going to chime in as well. Right, Chris, over to you.
Unless I take the next hour and a half talking about the pilot holistic review, which, trust me, is possible.
We have the power to mute your microphone, right?
Exactly. And I'm aware of that, so I'm not going to give you that opportunity. It actually fits very, very closely under discussions with the board, because in fact it turned into a far bigger discussion than just about the pilot holistic review. I'll be as quick as I can. Basically, the pilot holistic review we've been working on what the remit of the pilot holistic review is for some time now, and we reached a point where we didn't think we had consensus amongst the working group, the review team, about what the role of that review team was, or consensus about what's supposed to be happening with holistic reviews. So we reached out to the board operational organizational efficiency committee, effectiveness committee, sorry, had a conversation with them before the meeting, and we were going to spend some time at the meeting actually discussing with various parties what the answers to our questions were. In parallel to that, the board decided that it would ask each of the SOs, ACs a question as to what they think about the current review cycle and whether they feel that there is anything that the board should do. And in fact, the board put on the table, at least in a number of sessions, the possibility of effectively pausing everything and doing a review of reviews, going back to the beginning and saying, what, not against reviews at all, but what do we review, why do we review, and how should we review it? And partly that arises from the simple fact that the current reviews that are done, ATRT3, security, stability, resilience, and others, were in essence an invention of as part of the transition. When we transitioned from the US government, effectively what happened was NTIA, I think it actually probably goes back to the affirmation of commitment, NTIA said, these are the things you need to review every 5 years, and they may not anymore be fit for purpose. So we found ourselves discussing the future of the pilot holistic review, and therefore the holistic review, in the context of whether or not there will be, in fact, a review of all reviews. So at the moment, we're waiting to see what the board wants to do. The pilot holistic review, Sophie Hay and I, the joint chairs of the pilot holistic review, have written formally to the board, to the OEC, to the chairs of each SO and AC, and to the chairs of ATRT3 who made the recommendations. That's Cheryl Langdonor and Pat Kane from VeriSign. And that is, I think, on the correspondence page. If it isn't, it will be very soon. And that sets out a proposal of a way forward that we could take in the event that the board decides that it does want to proceed rather than doing a review of reviews. And very quickly, that proposal is simply to bifurcate the two sides. There is the review of the continuous improvement efforts of the SOs and ACs. Currently, those continuous improvement efforts are being put together. So to deal with that separately and say, let's do a review of their continuous improvement efforts, which by definition we can only do once they've done some continuous improvement. And on the other side of the fence, a structural review of ICANN, and we would need to design a structural review utilizing the current terms of bylaws and terms of reference for such reviews. We've said we can do it. Not that it'll be easy, but we can do it. But we're currently waiting to see which direction the board wants to move in. Thanks.
All right, great, thank you. Philip, you also wanted to come in on that topic.
Yeah, well, I haven't much to add really to what Chris just said. We discussed this with the board, and the issue is really to, as Chris said, to sort of dissociate the variables, try and make sure that we don't have overlaps between the various tracks. Ranging from incremental improvements on one side of the spectrum versus structural review on the other side. Our view within the CSG was that we should be forward-looking and probably start thinking about the bigger picture first, mindful that this is also the most challenging, so that would take time. But we're looking forward to the answer of the board to what the co-chairs have put forward. But as a way forward, I think the CSG would support this. Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks so much, Philip. I mean, I think that a discussion took place in various places how we deal with reviews. You know, ICANN is tagged by many from the outside as being too bureaucratic, not getting things done. And if we then spend a lot of volunteer time reviewing ourselves, question is whether that makes ICANN and its community look good, or whether we should rather try to use volunteer hours on producing something tangible that helps the industry. So that's an ongoing discussion. But thank you so much, Chris and Philippe, for enlightening us on that topic. Now, next on the list is WSIS plus 20, and Joanna, you're going to give us an update on that.
Indeed. Thank you so much for having me today, Thomas, and it's always a pleasure to join these very condensed, very concise meetings, giving us a chance to review all the work that was done and to see it ahead of us as the ICANN community. I'm going to start us off with WSIS plus 20, acting as the at-large liaison to the GAC, since the topic is very high on the agenda of both constituencies, but I very much look forward to intervention from Chris Disspain, who's been leading ICANN's community work on this, and Nicolas Caballero, who has been very kind and generous hosting these discussions as part of our bilaterals. I appreciate the opportunity to speak after Philippe, because I believe that the discussions around WSIS plus 20 and the steps we have taken in Seattle attend to the challenge that he identified. We have a diverse community that spans continents around the globe, particularly true for the at-large and for the GAC. And regulatory developments sometimes tend to catch us, maybe not by surprise, but it seems as if we might be better prepared. Hence, we hosted a WSIS plus 20 discussion during the bilateral. The key takeaway there is indeed to tighten the cooperation, to make sure that the work that is done on the ground within ALSs, the at-large structures, within different departments of governments is indeed consolidated, and as such results in a WSIS plus 20 process that supports the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. This is a particularly challenging time geopolitically. It seems as if different forces are trying to impact multi-stakeholder governance or the multi-stakeholder model for internet governance, prioritizing multilateral conversations and the policy or law regulatory development processes. Hence, the key takeaway from the bilateral is indeed to work more closely across, particularly these two broad communities. We have selected topic leads. We are going to support them in individually aligning the work that goes into the WSIS plus 20 process. But I wanted to grab the floor to start us off with this discussion, also to highlight that there are more opportunities for engagement. One of the formats we have initiated late last year are these short 60 minutes bilateral sessions co-hosted by the at-large and the GAC, where we focus on one selected topic that is of geopolitical or maybe regulatory relevance to the community. These sessions are hosted with the invaluable support from ICANN's governmental engagement team. And we did host a dedicated session on WSIS plus 20. Then we focused on a little bit of a different topic. We will speak on DNS abuse during today's session as well. So we've looked at current UN processes around a universal cybercrime treaty and how it might impact or support us in making sure that the network is free from DNS abuse in the way that we have defined it as a community. The following meeting in April will again likely host a guest speaker speaking on Budapest Convention and the UN Cybercrime Treaty, but we are looking forward to re-engaging around WSIS plus 20. The time is ripe since the meeting will happen at the end of the first quarter in early July. But it seems as if it is just one of the pivotal points of international discussions that impact regulation, UN processes included. I will stop here. I'm very much looking forward to Chris's more precise, concise, community-focused report on the work that is being done on the ground, including the invaluable mailing list that is very popular and helps us keep up to date with all the developments. But this is just to highlight that the two communities are working closely to make sure that whatever regulation might come up in WSIS plus 20 or beyond is high on the agenda of its members, and hopefully this new concise format will help us consolidate our positions and act efficiently in the face of potential geopolitical challenges. I'm going to stop here. Thank you again for letting me open the discussions, and I look forward to other speakers discussing the theme. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Let's go to Chris then, and then to Nico.
Thank you. Thanks, Joanna. I'm likely to end up being a bit controversial here, so trigger warning for those who don't like controversy. Yes, there's a vast amount of stuff going on within ICANN. There is this huge 600-member mailing list where discussions take place. The technical community, separately from ICANN, but obviously, as part of the ICANN community, is running a thing called the TCCM, which is the technical community coming together to promote the multi-stakeholder model for the purposes of ICANN's remit, as opposed to the multi-stakeholder model as the solution to all the problems in the world. We also have a small group that meets regularly with ICANN or ICANN staff. It's a sort of brainstorming session to come up with ideas that might be useful. But I wanted to just make this point, which is that this is, as Joanna says, we're at an incredibly important time. And from the point of view of the way that WSIS is likely to be run, assuming that the WSIS review and the way that it's dealt with is maintained in much the same way as it's previously been done, then there is scope for the community to be involved in various different ways until you get to the General Assembly in October or whenever it is, December in New York, when of course it is only governments in the room. However, there are one or two significant differences that are worth bearing in mind and lead me to say that it is critically important that everybody who's involved, whether you're involved in ICANN and at large, or the GAC, or Cs or Gs, or you're just interested generally, or you're involved with ISOC around the world, to actually reach out to your governments and say that you think that using the multi-stakeholder model for internet infrastructure is important. And the two things that have changed, and since we did WSIS 10, are one, that we have Europe, who supports the multi-stakeholder model, but has taken in the last few years to legislating when it decided it doesn't like the results of the multi-stakeholder model, or doesn't think the multi-stakeholder model is moving quickly enough. And secondly, and perhaps far more importantly, we have the US government, who have until now always been the major sponsor, small s, of the multi-stakeholder model around the world, and a bulwark against attempts by some territories and countries to change that. And the truth of the matter is we haven't the faintest idea what the US government is likely to do in this context as we go into the WSIS process for the rest of this year. So what we do and what we tell our governments matters far more probably than it has in the past. Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks so much, Chris. And Nico, you're next, and shout out to you for wearing the ICANN Hamburg t-shirt. That looks great on you.
Thank you, Thomas. Before talking about the next round, I just wanted to add some comments to what Chris was mentioning. Basically, with the GAG, we had many interesting exchanges, with community members, interested in the WSIS plus 20 process, including in bilaterals, that were held between the GAC and many other constituencies. And as a matter of fact, we also had a full session, a full dedicated GAC plenary session. We, again, to Chris's point, we welcome, the GAC welcomes, the ongoing engagement program of ICANN.org on the WSIS plus 20 process, and we intend, to continue facilitating exchanges on the matter between, GAC members and other constituencies. I don't have a clear idea about what specific governments, might or might not do in the near future. But in any case, I just wanted to confirm that we intend to continue facilitating, those exchanges with other constituencies and stakeholder groups. And one last thing is, we in the GAC prefer to say multi-stakeholder approach, not necessarily multi-stakeholder model, right? So that's basically what I wanted to say regarding the WSIS Plus 20 process, to which Joanna and Chris have already commented on. I was going to talk a little bit about the next round, which seems to be like the sexy, topic nowadays for obvious reasons. Not that the GAC necessarily has a stake or any kind of special interest other than, the public interest, as I always say. In that sense, we received, a detailed update from ICANN.org, and thank you again, Chris Mondini and your team and the full ICANN.org team. In anticipation of the next round of generic TLDs, that, as everybody knows, is expected for 2026, if I'm not mistaken-ish. So, they provided us with updates on efforts that are, currently being undertaken by the IRT, the implementation review team, to implement these policy recommendations for an updated applicant guidebook by May 2025. I'm not going to get into the details, and I'm not going to talk too much about the applicant support program, to which Joanna will be talking a little bit about in just a second. But in terms of the other important things, for the GAC, and as a matter of fact, this was included under issues of importance for the GAC, are two other items, two other topics. The first one being apart from the applicant support program, I say, right? The applicant fees and refunds and the global outreach, and promotion, the ICANN in your language outreach program. So as regarding the application fees and refunds, we continue to have concerns on how the applicant fee level will actually, affect applications from underdeveloped or underserved regions, or the global south, or however we want to call it, right? Some members also, asked about the level of applicant refunds, very especially when an application is withdrawn early for whatever reason. We're not going to get into the details, but for whatever reason, the application is withdrawn. So, in such circumstances, the kinds of refund categories, if above or below the 65%, might or might not be appropriate, and so on and so forth. And we could discuss about this for hours, but for the sake of time, I'll just go on to the next important topic, which is the global outreach. And in that sense, I just wanted to to mention that we also encourage ICANN.org to further develop and promote its on-demand translation of the new GTLD program materials. The ICANN in your language initiative, to enhance outreach and engagement in the next round, basically by extending, coverage beyond, the 6 ICANN languages. I'm not sure, and I stand to be corrected here, I'm not sure if Portuguese is part of the 6 ICANN languages, and please excuse my utter ignorance in that sense, but, excluding 400 million Portuguese speakers, I don't think that would be a very good idea. So let me stop here in order to see if we have questions, or I don't know, maybe Joanna, you would like to chime in regarding the ASP, the Applicant Support Program, or you want me to speak about that? I'll be glad to, but at this point, let me stop and give you the floor.
Yeah, why don't we go to Joanna, and then Nico, if you want to, you can add to that, and others as well, certainly. Joanna.
Certainly. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nico. And also many thanks to Chris. This shout out for consolidated policy work when it comes to facilitating the multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance is very timely and most appreciated. I believe this is of highest importance to all of the communities. Now, speaking on both the next round of GTLDs and the applicant support program, but also on our next topic, which is DNS abuse, I asked for the floor to report on a session that we hosted as the at-large, reviewing the promise that was made at the end of the previous round of GTLDs. This session, as already said, included both topics. Hence, there was feedback on the applicant support program, where it stands and what it might be, whether it meets the expectations of the community, as well as on the highly anticipated informal report and the way forward for DNS abuse. I'm going to start with the first topic, which is the applicant support program. The overall feedback we have received during our dedicated session, trying to get a feel of the room, a feel of the community, where we stand and whether the applicant support program meets the promise from the previous round, whether we have learned from the lessons of the past. I regretfully need to report that the answer to that question was utterly negative. It seems as if the applicant support program, despite best efforts, does not fully meet the expectations of the community, partially because of reasons that Nico already mentioned. The financial burden will likely disincentivize underserved regions, smaller entrepreneurs. We've heard in the room comments from our individual community members saying this program remains a scheme for those who already have invested into the system and will likely want to further develop their position. Now, this is not to say that the applicant support program is not going to achieve the original aims, but there seems to be a certain reluctance in the community to take on the help that is being offered, the risk that comes with filing an application, the limited reimbursement that might be received, and particularly the knowledge of the market. We, as the at-large, focus not only on getting new players onto the ground, onto the next round of GTLDs, but also to make sure that that model is sustainable. So if we do manage to have underserved regions joining the process, we would want to make sure that those whom we encourage actually are able to then sustain whatever domain they will want to host. So in that sense, the applicant support program, because of certain financial issues and because of maybe capacity building potential that is still out there, and I know that the stakeholder engagement group is doing a lot, making sure that particularly those who might be new to this community, might be new to this environment, are sufficiently supported. Those efforts are truly appreciated. However, the takeaway from our session was that the program might attend more closely to the needs of those who are not very well established as members of the registrars and registries community. I'm going to stop here and just check if we have any feedback on the applicant support program. If it is, however, recommended, I do note we are moving swiftly with our agenda. I'm glad to speak also to start the discussion on DNS abuse, since that was the second component of that session. Would that work, Thomas?
Let's go to Nico first. He has raised his hand. So I understand, Nico, that you would like to add to the applicant support program discussion.
Thank you, Thomas. No. Just to say that apart from the next round of GTLDs and the WSIS plus 20 topics to which we have already referred, the GAC also, talked about domain name registration data. And in that sense, we emphasize the importance of ensuring, accuracy, privacy, security in domain name registration data. We call for basically, continued collaboration between ICANN and stakeholders, to address challenges related to data access and compliance with global privacy regulations. And I also very quickly wanted to add that, another topic we covered that is very important for the GAC is the ICANN Community Participant Code of Conduct concerning SOIs or statements of interest, right? We support efforts to enhance transparency and accountability within the ICANN community, as everybody knows, and we have already given advice in that regard previously. We again encourage the adoption of a robust code of conduct for participants, particularly concerning the disclosure of statements of interest, as I said before, basically to maintain trust and integrity in decision-making processes. And we'll talk about DNS abuse in a little while, so I'll stop here. Thank you, Joanna.
All right. Thanks so much, Nico, and thanks for bringing up the topic of SOIs. Just to offer a little bit of context to the attendees, there's been a huge discussion. This discussion has been going on for quite a while around to what extent you have to disclose whom you are representing when you're participating in ICANN's working groups and otherwise. And there are some who unfortunately belong to my profession, lawyers, that say that they can't say who they represent. So that's the part of the community that is in favor of allowing for them to participate without disclosing whom they represent, whilst others say even lawyers can ask their clients for permission to disclose who they're representing, so that everyone knows on whose behalf they're speaking and attending. Because there's this risk of undue influence in the policy-making process if, let's say, several attorneys, are working on behalf of one entity that then has multiple bites at the apple. All right. Any more hands to chime in on the topic so far? And if not, I suggest, Joanna, that we continue with the conversation on DNS abuse.
Great. Thank you very much, Thomas. I apologize. It seems as if my network connection is a little bit sloppy. I apologize if there are interruptions to sound and or vision. Just very briefly, because I realized that the DNS abuse theme is very high on everyone's agenda. I have, as already said, taken the liberty to report on our at largest perspective on this vital topic during the said session, whether to understand better whether we are ready for the next round, whether we are ready to fight DNS abuse. The answer here was far more positive. Clearly, DNS abuse remains an issue, but because of the enhanced work from different community members from around the globe, DNS abuse is being addressed at the policy level, probably to the highest possible level, and it is likely the greatest success as community that we have achieved. The comprehensive approach taken by GAC members working together with law enforcement agencies on the ground, but also raising awareness by different communities targeting their individual members, as is the case with the at-large or individual local communities, is highly appreciated. The DNS abuse discussion this time focused around the informal report, highly praised, very interesting, giving us metrics to follow up on. Maybe there is a way to move forward, making those findings more operational. So as much as we are able to better understand where DNS abuse comes from, we might wish to use the results of that relatively fresh new study to better attend to the challenge on the ground. So in terms of reporting from the at-large front, DNS abuse remains very high on our agenda. We appreciate the opportunity to speak to other community members. We hosted a dedicated NARALO roundtable where we talked about DNS abuse and AI, how it might facilitate the work of the bad guys, so to speak, and how we might wish to prevent the deployment of AI to enhance DNS abuse. So in that sense, the at-large remains vigilant on how to best counter DNS abuse and grateful to the community for all the work that is being done around that topic. Again, I am mindful that we have a long list of speakers here, so I'll leave this as an introduction. And I'll bid my apologies. I do have to drop off the session a little bit earlier today due to conflicting professional commitments. Thank you again so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to hearing others. Thanks so much.
Joanna, thank you so much. And if you have to leave in the next few minutes, it's great to have you, as always. Thank you for sharing your insights. And I do know that one other panelist, named Chris Disspain, also needs to leave a little earlier. So I would suggest that we go to Chris, and then we follow up with Nico, Greg, and Philippe.
Thanks very much, Thomas. I'm just going to give a very brief overview of the ccNSO DNS Abuse Standing Committee. This is the ccNSO moving into the sort of DNS abuse territory is relatively new territory because, as I'm sure everyone knows, each CC is in charge of its own territory from the point of view of the ccTLD. And so obviously what they do about DNS abuse is not a matter for global policy, but rather a matter for local policy and in some cases, of course, legislation. But that said, the ccNSO has, for the last couple of years, had the DNS Abuse Standing Committee in place, which is charged with looking at best practice, collecting data from other ccTLDs, and also interfacing with other parts of ICANN. So there is a fair bit of work being done across the C&G world with the DNS Abuse Standing Committee and the CPH, Contracted Parties House, DNS Abuse Working Group, talking to each other and making sure that everyone is fully aware of what's going on. Nothing specific to report really from the CC DASC meeting in Seattle, but it's an ongoing there's ongoing work, and watch this space. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Nico is next.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Chris. In that regard, I can say that the GAC, we received a lot of different perspectives, in meetings with the GNSO, with the CPH, with the ALAC, as Joanna correctly pointed out a while ago, and with the SSAC as well. In general, we can say that these conversations, these interactions, basically seem to reflect, our converging views, right, on the relevance of this data, this newly available data coming from, as you already know, Domain Metrica, the Informal report, and many other sources. But at this point, in order, and again, for the sake of time, let me just say that we reiterated, the urgency of combating DNS abuse, including, phishing, malware, botnets, and so on and so forth, and other malicious activities. We called for stronger, I would say, stronger collaboration among ICANN.org itself, registries, registrars, and law enforcement agencies, to develop truly effective mitigation strategies, right, to ensure, a safer, a way safer DNS ecosystem. I could go on, but let me stop here again for the sake of time. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much. So we have more speakers in the queue. So Greg, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. So as you know, the GNSO is the policy-making body of ICANN, and we have had this DNS abuse small team that looks to identify issues related to DNS abuse and how policy development could potentially address them, and whether policy development is the best path to addressing specific issues. So the first time this team met, we gathered input from the community, what the community was seeing, in an attempt to identify, all possible issues that policy could address. During that first conversation, we found a gap in the ICANN compliance mechanism. Basically, the contracts between ICANN and registrars and registries said that registrars had to respond to abuse reports, but they didn't specifically say that registrars had to mitigate abuse. So the contracted parties stepped forward and negotiated a DNS abuse amendment with ICANN to modify the contract to add that piece in, that when an abuse report is received, contracted parties not only respond to it, but when appropriate, they mitigate that abuse. So the DNS abuse small team went on a hiatus while these DNS abuse amendments were negotiated and went into effect. And the idea was to give compliance time to change their processes, gather metrics, and then report back. So that has happened. It's been a year since the DNS abuse amendments were executed. ICANN compliance has reported back to the GNSO Council on what they're seeing. And also in the meantime, as others have said, there have been other developments. The informal report has been released. There's been increased collaboration between the contracted parties and abuse reporters, and working to develop informal mechanisms to develop abuse, or to develop mitigation mechanisms for abuse. So now the DNS abuse small team on the GNSO Council is reconvened. They're going to look at this new data, right? What's coming out of the informal report, metrics from compliance, as well as original recommendations from the DNS abuse small team, which considered things like what is the best way to scope a policy development effort, and some of the thinking there was focus on a discrete specific issue that if we can wrap our arms around it and have a more efficient PDP, as opposed to looking at, quote, DNS abuse generally, which is harder to define. So that group will be working on ingesting these new inputs and updating recommendations on what's the best way to proceed to address these outstanding issues of DNS abuse. Is it a targeted PDP? Is there other outreach efforts from contracted parties, things of that nature? So that team is getting their work underway and will report back to council in the next couple months, and we will continue addressing this really important topic.
All right, thank you so much, Greg. Philip, you also wanted to chime in on this one.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, and as a compliment to what Greg has just said, sometimes we're criticized for not being pragmatic at ICANN. And I think the session that we held with between the commercial stakeholder group and the contracted party house was just the contrary. It was very pragmatic. We went through a number of what the CSG would consider abuse scenarios, and discussed those with our CPH colleagues to determine what might be missing in the abuse reports, for example. And obviously we went through the usual copyright infringements versus phishing discussion. So we went through a handful of those and received some feedback as to how those reports could be better tailored for the receiving side to take action on those abuse reports. So that was the first of the kind, I think. Obviously, time will tell whether that's sufficient moving forward. I think we should probably have another one of those to determine whether the recommendations, once followed, actually led to a different result. So we'll see. Speaking personally, I put forward one scenario, which was a homographic attack, which I considered a homographic attack, a phishing case. And I should have mentioned this. We didn't talk about specific domain names. We picked up examples. We didn't name names as far as registrars are concerned. So that was all cordial. There was no name dropping. But as far as I am concerned, I'm happy to report that that with the presentation during that session, as well as corridor discussions, 7 days later, the website was suspended because it was considered phishing. So I think, as far as I am concerned, speaking selfishly, that was a success. Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks so much, Philippe. And just to maybe add to that, I thought it was fascinating to be in the room for that session, because you have the requestor side, basically or primarily the IPC and the BC, the business constituency and the intellectual property constituency, are typically very vocal about abuse cases and what should be considered DNS abuse and whatnot. And sometimes you get the sense like the contracted parties, who are the ones who are receiving requests, are perceived to be stubborn, just not doing enough, whilst the contracted parties think that maybe the requesters are going too far with their requests. So it was fascinating to see practitioners elaborate on their thinking and as why they can't help with certain things, for technical or legal reasons, and thereby create mutual understanding of why you're dealing with certain cases the way you do. And I think that helps break down barriers between the different camps, so to speak. And I hope that we're going to have more of these sessions, maybe not only in the area of DNS abuse, to help everyone, understand and work more constructively together to resolve these real life issues. Now, anyone else on DNS abuse before we move on? So now it's my pleasure. Hervé, you've been very patiently waiting, so thank you so much for being with us today.
That's right, but it was very interesting, so no problem.
That's great to hear. So there's an acronym, ICP2 on the slide, and I'm sure that you're going to enlighten the participants as to what that means. Hervé, I can't hear you.
So the address supporting organization moment, so the ISO within law.
Can you please repeat what you were saying? Because there was an audio issue.
There was an audio, so it's okay now?
Yeah, let's give it a try. Yeah.
No? Hello? Okay, it's okay now? Okay. Perfect. Perhaps I will turn off my camera. It's not very polite, but it could improve the bandwidth. I will do that. Okay. So the address supporting organization, so within our acronym. So you know that the ISO is comprised of the ISO Address Council, the emanation from the community. So I am the chair of. And the EDROEC composed of the CEOs of the different IP addresses regions. ICP2, so you know it's very famous now. Is a document who describes the criteria for the establishment of a new region, like the RIPE MCC, like the Afrinic, etc. And we were asked by the NROEC to update this document. There was a first update. There was an ICANN consultation on that in October and November. And we analyzed the answers, and via the answer we all received, we have elaborated a draft document, a draft policy, and it was done during the APNIC meeting in Kuala Lumpur, end of February. There was after that the ICANN83, the ICANN meeting, and I had the opportunity with the two vice chairs, so Nick Nugent and Esteban Lescano, to present this draft document to the NROEC during Seattle. This document has been very well received, so we have been happy about that. And it was decided to publish this draft document, so you will have the opportunity to read it at the beginning of April. And it will be another turn of ICANN consultation in parallel with regional questionnaire in April and May. So the ISOAC will be very happy to see your answers via this new consultation in April and May, so that we will be able to analyze these new answers and to draft another document nearly complete in June during the ICANN 83 in Prague. So that was one component of our presence in Seattle. We had the opportunity also, the global ISO, to meet the ICANN board in Seattle as well. There was a presentation from Hans Peter of what was all the work regarding the ISO, not only ICP2, but also the ICANN board election as well, and all of other current issues we can have. There was a presentation, of course, of the current Afrinic problematic of governance. The board was very interested, as I can understand, of the presentation and inputs we gave on that. And so it was an ongoing work. It is an ongoing work and a restart of a new milestone of our work. So I will be very pleased to have additional questions if you have. But as I can understand, so Philip will be very happy to chime in on that.
Exactly, Philip.
Thank you, Thomas.
Would you like to add to that?
Certainly, just to add that the ISP constituency, the ISPCP, provided some comments, and we discussed those with the board. Essentially, what we were trying to get at was to say that the policy should be, I think the word we used was stress test against a number of scenarios, including those where the revised policy may be used or captured by a limited number of hostile parties. Let's call them that way. To be recognized. What happened with Afrinic comes to mind, obviously, when you have someone who's unhappy with the decision by a regional internet registry. They have the money, they reach out to other like-minded people, they get together and they try and use the revised ICP2 to be recognized as the term is used. So that's the sort of nightmare scenarios that we thought that moving forward it'd be interesting to test that against. Whether that's extreme or not, we think that moving forward that's the right thing to do. Otherwise, we're obviously supportive. The ISPs are obviously supportive of the revised version. Unsurprisingly, I should say, we even request that revision. Thank you, Elia. Thanks, Ali. Thomas.
Thanks so much. Anyone else on this topic? All right. If not, then let's move to Greg, who's going to report from the GNSO Council a little bit, a couple of topics that we discussed there when we had fun in Seattle.
Thanks, Thomas. So yeah, we already touched on the small team on DNS abuse, so I'll touch on just two other topics. The first is we voted on a final report for a review of the transfer policy. The transfer policy is the policy that governs transfers of domains between registrars. So this is really, a foundational piece of how the domain name system works, right? Anyone is free to transfer their domain to a new registrar at any time. This was a review of the transfer policy, as all ICANN policies are periodically reviewed, updated, and improved. So some of I think that the features that might be worth noting, things like changes in the locks after a domain is registered. There was a 60-day lock that was viewed by many in the community to be cumbersome and unnecessary. That's been changed to a 30-day lock. There was updates regarding terminology. Some of the terminology was a little confusing or outdated. There's more clarity around bulk transfers between registrars, right? Now, all registrars can participate in bulk transfers after portfolio acquisitions, and then just improve security measures. So the working group that put together this report delivered the report to council, gave a detailed overview of what it entailed. I think it's also worth noting that this working group completed this work on schedule and on time. So I think that's a big win for the community and the GNSO. And so we voted to approve it. It will now go to the ICANN board for approval. And then assuming the ICANN board adopts the policy, it will become effective in contracts for registries and registrars after an implementation period. So there'll be an implementation period for registrars to implement the changes to the transfer policy. There will be some changes in operations. So that's the first thing. So that vote was approved. Next, kind of related to what I described on the DNS abuse small team, we're also convening a small team on accuracy. So accuracy is a topic that the GNSO has been focused on for a while. We had a scoping team a little over 2 years ago, I believe, that was trying to scope the issue for a potential PDP. That team ran into some difficulty in assessing the problem that was to be addressed by policy because there's not sample data available, right? Under GDPR and other data privacy regulations, there's not a valid legal purpose to take random registrant samples for the purpose of assessing accuracy. So we went about gathering data a different way. We sent surveys out to all the communities, the SOs, ACs within ICANN for their feedback on what they're seeing as potential issues under this accuracy heading, potential ways to address it, and the timeline to address it. So we got those survey results back. There's definitely some divergence of opinion on this topic, whether what exactly the issue is that policy could address, whether existing mechanisms are sufficient, because there are a number of existing mechanisms within the registrar contracts to ensure accuracy. So the small team is going to go through those survey results, parse out where there seems to be consensus, highlight, if there is a divergence of opinion, let's face that head on, understand what the divergence is, and then produce a report that goes back to council, and we'll decide what the next steps on accuracy are. And so this will kind of happen in parallel with the small team on DNS abuse. There may be some overlap there, but we will see. So I'll leave it there as the two primary updates from GNSO Council.
Yeah, thanks so much, Greg. And I can't resist, adding a little bit to that, because there seems to be this fetish, if I may call it so, that if only we had accurate registration data, we would solve all the world's problems. And I think that we need to manage expectations. It's on all of us to make sure that law enforcement, public safety working group members, community members, regardless of what group they belong to, understand that this is only part of the solution. If you talk about a compromised web space, for example, that's something that accounts for, I think, half of all phishing cases. Accuracy of registration data doesn't help with that at all, because it's a legitimate domain owner, just he or she failed to patch and update their web space, and there was a vulnerability that's been exploited by a bad actor. Also, we do know that there are some TLDs that are heavily regulated and where registration data is heavily vetted, and yet those are amongst the ones ranking highest when it comes to abuse, right? So we need to be very careful not to try give the outside world the expectations that if only we had this fabulous registration data that we would have a silver bullet solution against cybercrime. Ram, your hand is up.
Thank you, Thomas. I agree with you in what you're saying that we simply having accurate data, it doesn't solve the problem. From the law enforcement point of view, one of the things that the SSAC has been speaking up, and we spoke about it at the ICANN82 meeting, is it's not about whether you have complete data, accurate data, etc. What's actually one of the problems right now that we're hearing from our friends in law enforcement is access to the registration data. They're finding that in some cases that there is a rate limiting, they get 10 requests in a day, and then they're blocked out for another 24-hour time period. And that becomes a problem if you're researching a botnet, etc. And it's in those cases, it's not even that you need to know who the registrant is. It's you need to know who the registrar is in order to be able to find out, who to reach. And we're hearing cases where they're getting blocked out. So I think at least from the SSAC point of view, one of the areas that we're focusing on is access to data and having a way for legitimate access requests, to be granted in a way that doesn't block them from doing important work.
Thanks so much, Ram, for offering these insights from your group. And I think you're spot on. Sometimes it's too cumbersome to get data disclosed that you need for your investigations or otherwise. And I hope that with the RDRS, which is also an ongoing project, we're going to make progress and get everyone to be more efficient in processing disclosure requests. Greg, your hand is raised. Over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to note that work on a final report on the RDRS, right? This registration directory service was a pilot. There's a group that's going to report back on their conclusions of the effectiveness, and that's going to feed into board consideration on addressing the topics of access, as Ram described. And then I think in parallel, there's also a group looking again at the privacy proxy policy that implementation was paused after GDPR. And now we're looking fresh again at that. So I think there's, multiple streams to address these issues. And as Thomas said, there's not one silver bullet on each topic, right? There's it's more of a tapestry of policies that work together to try to improve things for the community.
Thanks so much, Greg. I think with that, we can move to the next topic, and Philippe is going to give us an update on the ISPCP capacity building workshop.
Thank you, Thomas. Indeed, at ICANN82, we had a hands-on, well, let me just put the context first. We organized a series of capacity building webinars, mostly online so far, on DNS. We've been doing this with the help of the Office of the CTO, since I think October last year, and at ICANN82 we had a hands-on session specifically on the topic of BGP routing and DNS. We had a 3-hour session on the Wednesday, which was well attended by fellows, long-time members of the ISPCP, CCs as well. So that was a really interesting session. We played with the BGP implementation, as well as installation of DNS servers, announcements of prefixes, etc. All fun, and unsurprisingly, we didn't make it through. But I guess that's the rule of the game. This being said, we have another 2 webinars, I think, which I haven't got the dates off the top of my head, but you can find those on ispcp.info, our website. The next is on DNS threats, I think. So please join in. Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks so much, Philippe. And last but not least, we're now going to hear from Ram, and he's going to give us an update on what SSAC is doing.
Thank you. 2 things that the SSAC is focused on right now. One is we're doing some work on the impact of open source software. It's really an assessment of open source software as it is used in critical DNS infrastructure. This is particularly in light of some efforts inside of the European Union that are focused on open source and supply chain mapping. So we've begun work on that. We expect to have a report most likely by the ICANN84 meeting in Oman. And there's quite a lot of work that has gone into it, including a survey to DNS operators, registries, registrars, etc., especially critical infrastructure providers on how and where they're using open source software. So that there's work going in that area. The second thing that the SSAC is working on is to refresh its guidelines and to refresh its analysis of DNS blocking. So many years ago, we wrote about DNS blocking, and we had provided some guidance in that area. What we've realized is that in the years that have passed since that time, many governments around the world and in many jurisdictions, some form of DNS blocking is currently underway or has already been implemented. And so we're going from our earlier advice, which was don't do it. It's not a good idea to do DNS blocking wholesale. We're moving to a position that reflects reality, that says DNS blocking is here and here to stay. So now we're saying we're trying to provide advice and education, especially aimed at regulators, at governments, at policymakers, to say, please be aware of the scale and scope when you implement laws or when you implement policies that look to block internet traffic at the DNS level. The impact of it is huge. So this paper goes to write about just how massive it is. You know, this is really at the top of the pendulum. So when you make a small change, the swing is much higher than at the bottom of the pendulum, right? So we're working on that. This paper we're expecting to have available for review and for dissemination by the upcoming ICANN83 meeting in Prague. So that those are 2 areas, and we're getting a lot of responses on both of those topics as well. We're also in the early stages of looking at the operational implications and the operational assessment of DNSSEC deployment in critical infrastructure. So we're just about to begin some work in that area. I see a couple of hands have popped up, so let me take a breath and turn it back to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, Ram. Obviously, you've sparked off a debate or a discussion, so let's go to Nico and then to Philippe.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you very much, Ram. You raised a very important and strategic issue, I would say. You know, I really think, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the GAC. That's for the record, right? But I really think that, that it is, open source software, OSS, is actually, a matter of it's like a strategic imperative, if I may, right? Especially in an era where digital sovereignty, on the one hand, and technological self-reliance are paramount, especially for governments. I don't need to get into the details there, right? But so OSS or open source software has emerged, I would say, for the last 30 or maybe more years, at least 30 years, as a cornerstone, for innovation and security on the one hand, and for economic efficiency on the other hand. So for big organizations like ICANN, which, by the way, is, nowadays facing resource constraints, while managing critical internet resources, right, and infrastructure. Open source software basically offers I would say a transformative path, if I may, to reduce, on the one hand, to reduce dependency on proprietary systems, to mitigate operational costs, speaking of how we meet and how we can save money by having only 2 face-to-face meetings during the year and one potentially one virtual meeting, and so on and so forth. So we're talking about mitigating operational costs, right? So I really think that this is the elephant, in the room. And again, in more general terms, to foster global collaboration, given the advantages, given the I would say the beauty of the, just to give an example, the GPL3 kind of license, that would allow, I'm not going to get into the details. I just wanted to point out to 3 really good advantages, of using, and I'm all in favor of everything you're doing, Ram. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing. On the contrary, the first one is, as I said before, the cost efficiency and flexibility, of the Apache. Just to give an example, the Apache 2.0 license, the GPLv3, and so on and so forth. Security, and the second is security and through transparency. Security through transparency, because obviously you will be able to review the source code and audit the source code and so on. I won't get into the details, but the third point is technical agility. Technical agility in terms of allowing, a rapid adaptation to evolving needs. I don't need to give you an example of well, anyways, we could talk a lot about that, but and I'll finish with this, and sorry for bringing this up at this point, but I really think it's important, the benefit, for governments, and I'm not saying all governments have a stake here, and again, I'm not speaking on behalf of the GAC, I'm just saying that, just to give an example, in terms of economic sovereignty, which would apply to ICANN and how we meet and the whole thing, just the European Union, and we have governments on this call from the European Union who can attest, to what I'm saying, saved 1.3 billion euros annually by adopting open source software, and thus reducing reliance on proprietary vendors. That's one thing. Just to give another example very quickly, and I'll finish here. Estonia's X-Road system, was built on open standards, on open source software, and they basically cut governance costs. And I stand to be corrected here if any representative of the government of Estonia is here, but it is my understanding that they save 60% costs while ensuring data sovereignty. I'll stop here. I could go on and on and on, but let me just congratulate you, Ram. I'm with you, fully support your efforts, and you can count me in. I can volunteer as I'll sweep the floor or whatever, serve coffee or do whatever you need in order to help.
Thanks so much, Nico. We will pick you up on the clean the floor thing. I guess that's going to be something that a lot of folks would like to witness. We will now go to Philippe, and afterwards I will offer the floor to Chris Mondini in case, Chris, you would like to make some final remarks, and then we can adjourn on time. So Philippe, please, over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. I will not offer to clean the floor, I have to say, but it was just to commend SSAC and RAM for the work on the DNS blocking document. I attended the working session. That's a draft, so we don't have it. I kindly ask for a presentation when it's ready for the ISPs. They will be very, as you would guess, very interested in especially I wouldn't call that recommendations, but there are ways to do it properly and other ways that are more harmful, as you said, Ron. So I think they will welcome that. The document as it's phrased, as we could say from a distance, since as I said, it's not available yet, but it's not judgmental. It's very pragmatic, and certainly well articulated. So so it's much more pragmatic, I would say, than the previous version, and the ISPs will know that, I think. Thank you, Thomas, and thanks, Ram.
Thanks so much, Philippe. Ram, did you want to come in again?
I was just saying, Philip, thank you so much. And when the document is ready, we'll look forward to coming and chatting with your constituency at that time.
Yeah, and maybe we can also host another webinar to talk about this important issue. Lars has kindly linked to a video that ECO's Top DNS initiative has had produced on domain suspensions, DNS blocking, and the collateral damage that it might cause. You know, because it's like the technical community has come up with this great, resilient, and robust system, and lawmakers and others are doing what they can in order to corrupt it. You know, and I think it is a fact, as you stated, Ram. It's a sad fact that sometimes it's applied in wrong ways or in disproportionate ways, and I think we're all looking forward to reading your document and hearing more about your initiative, which I think I can speak on behalf of everyone. We very much welcome. You know, I think that's something that's really needed. Before we adjourn, as I said, Chris, if you would like to come in for some closing remarks.
Yes, thank you, and congratulations to all of you. It's such an impressive recounting of all of the amazing work, the policy work, the review work, the advisory work, and all of you. The passion and dedication really comes through. So I find it very inspiring and useful and helpful. And the feedback with regard to outreach for the next round, the applicant support program, the opportunity to hone the language translation programs, it's all very welcome. So again, thank you for the invitation, and thanks for convening this group of great contributors to ICANN. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris. And that allows me to conclude this meeting. Thank you so much to Joanna, Chris Disspain, Hervé, Ram, Nico, Philippe, Chris, Greg, and last but not least, Lars from ECO for making this possible and making sure that this all works so smoothly, technically and organizationally. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you so much for your attention, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.